She left for school in her little red coat and never came back. For 7 years, I lived between police stations, empty promises, and the unbearable silence of the empty room. But when an anonymous call revealed, "She's not far away, they're just looking in the wrong place," I discovered that my daughter's disappearance was part of something much bigger and darker than any nightmare. Prepare yourself for a true story of pain, courage, and the system that hides horrors behind walls of silence. Watch until the end. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are listening to our story from, and prepare to be moved. You will understand why some scars never heal. I noticed that the routine that morning was calmer than usual. The sun had barely touched the kitchen floor, and I could already hear the clinking of spoons during breakfast, the muffled noise of the news coming from the television, and the hurried steps of my daughter running towards me with her school notebook in her hands. She was wearing a little red cardigan with a woolen hood, the kind she chose when she wanted to feel brave. She was only 7 years old, but she already seemed to carry the world in her eyes, eyes that I would later learn to look for in every unfamiliar face I passed. "Daddy, today is my day to present the forest project," she said, with an excitement that made my heart flutter. The school was only 3 blocks from home. Plovdiv is a lively city, full of movement, but the neighborhood where we lived always seemed quiet enough, too safe, too innocent. It was the kind of place where you greeted your neighbors by name, and where you could trust that the children would come home from school with the same joy they had when they left. I walked her to the gate myself. I watched her run into the schoolyard, and even with the bell about to ring, she still had time to turn around and blow a kiss in the air. That was the last moment I saw her, the exact moment I would revisit hundreds of times later, trying to find some detail there that could tell me what was coming next. The next few hours were normal. Coffee, work, meetings. At 1:15, as usual, I walked to the gate to pick her up, but the teacher said she had already left. "She was released with the others, as always," she replied with the same naturalness as every day. But at that moment, something in my chest simply collapsed. She wasn't there. Not on the sidewalk, not in the school garden, not with her usual classmates. I ran to the corner, then to the other one. I went to the newsstand where she liked to look at the stickers. I asked at the market, at the flower shop, at the coffee shop, where she sometimes stopped to get a free cookie that Mr. Ivan always offered. Nothing. No one had seen her. And then, abruptly, time stopped following its natural course. I found myself shouting her name in the middle of the street, my heart pounding, while an ancient fear took hold of me. Minutes turned into hours, hours turned into an abyss. I called the police. They arrived with a bureaucratic calm that made me want to scream. "Kids get distracted sometimes," they said. "Maybe she went to a friend's house." I already knew better. She would never do that without telling me. And the more I explained that this was not her behavior, the more I saw that quiet gleam of doubt in their eyes, as if it were my fault, as if I had missed something crucial. That night, I didn't sleep. I turned every inch of the house upside down. I opened drawers, looked for clues in her drawings, reread our notes taped to the refrigerator. Deep down, I knew. My daughter wasn't just missing. She had been taken, stolen, and I had no idea by whom or why. The next day, the newspapers began covering the case. Her photo, the one taken at school, with her hair tied up and her smile missing a front tooth, began to circulate on the streets. Social media began to share it. People began to send messages, suggestions, theories. Some said she had been seen at bus stations, others that she might have run away. But none of it made sense, because I knew my daughter, and she would never have left alone. The police, pressured by the repercussions, finally set up a task force. They began checking security cameras in the area, and that was when the first sign came. A low-resolution video showed a dark hooded figure walking alongside a child in a red coat on the other side of the school, on the side street that led to an empty parking lot. It was her, The video didn't capture the person's face. It didn't show the license plate of the car. But it showed enough to tear me apart inside. My daughter wasn't alone. Someone had taken her, calmly, coldly, with knowledge of where and when to act. From that point on, my life revolved around a single mission: finding my daughter. I quit my job. I stopped sleeping. I walked the streets with her photo printed on bond paper, handing it out to bus drivers, gas station attendants, store clerks, anyone who would listen to my story for 30 seconds. And as the days went by, something even more cruel began to set in. Silence. The silence of the neighbors, who no longer knew what to say. The silence of the police, who began to repeat the same phrases, and worst of all, the silence of her room. Still intact, like a reliquary of hope, stagnant in time. Then, one rainy afternoon, 17 days after she disappeared, I received an anonymous phone call. The voice was female, muffled and nervous. She said only one sentence before hanging up: "She's not far away, but you're looking in the wrong place." That was the first real clue I got, the first spark of something beyond the darkness. And it was also the moment I understood that my daughter's disappearance wasn't just an accident. It was part of something bigger, something cruel, something calculated. I heard that phrase repeating in my head again like a curse. "She's not far away, but you're looking in the wrong place." The woman's voice was tense, almost desperate. And there was something about the way she said each word that made me believe it. I knew it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prank. This was coming from someone who knew exactly what was going on. I ran to the police station and took the recording I had made of the call. I had already been recording all the calls on my cell phone, hoping something like this would happen. But the police were skeptical. They said it might have just been someone looking for attention. When I insisted, one of them looked at me and said, "We understand your pain, but you need to rest. This might be making you see things where there aren't any. Seeing things." As if a father's grief had to be rational. As if the fact that I was tired invalidated what was obvious. And that's when I realized no one else was searching as intensely as I was. No one else felt the way I felt. I was alone. Completely alone. I went back to watching the security cameras alone, even though I didn't understand much of it. I got the raw files that the police chief had left aside. I spent the nights pausing, rewinding, zooming in. And in one of the videos, captured by a security camera at a nearby pharmacy, I found something that chilled me to the core. It was a reflection. The reflection of a black car with its window half open. And there, in the back seat, what looked like a piece of my daughter's red hood. But the car didn't stop. It kept going, too fast. I took the video and went to a private monitoring company. I paid what I couldn't afford to have them analyze it frame by frame. They managed to get a clearer image of the side of the vehicle. Still no license plate visible. But now we had a new detail. A sticker stuck to the rear window with a strange symbol. A triangle cut by a vertical line, similar to an old coat of arms. I showed the image to the police officers. Most of them ignored it. One of them said he had seen the symbol before, in an old warehouse in the city's industrial zone. A place that had once been the headquarters of a truckers' cooperative and had since been abandoned. It was the first real wire I had. I went there without thinking twice. It was an old building with broken windows and graffiti faded by time. The gate was locked with thick chains, but I walked around the property and found a crack in the back, where part of the wall had already collapsed. I went in. The smell was unbearable. It smelled of rust, mold, and something I couldn't describe. A bitter smell, like accumulated despair. I walked slowly through the hallways, using only the flashlight on my phone. Inside, the place seemed frozen in time. Desks were piled high, old papers were piled high, chairs were broken. But at the back, next to an old conference room, I found something that almost made me fall to my knees. A child's hair ribbon with a heart-shaped detail. It was the same one my daughter was wearing the day she disappeared. Trembling, I put the tape in my pocket and kept walking. A noise caught my attention, a muffled sound like something was being dragged. I hid behind a stack of boxes and waited. Footsteps. Someone was moving around inside, and it wasn't just one. I could clearly hear two voices murmuring something. One was male, the other was the same voice I'd heard on the phone. Fear paralyzed me. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to scream. But something inside me knew that if I made any movement, it would ruin any chance of seeing my daughter again. I waited for minutes that felt like hours until the sound disappeared completely. I walked out slowly, mentally recording every detail of the place until I was able to return home with my heart racing and the hair ribbon clutched to my chest. That night, I could barely breathe. I felt like I was close, that there was someone or some group behind it all, and that it wasn't random. My daughter was taken for a reason, and maybe that symbol on the car wasn't just decorative. Maybe it was the mark of something bigger. The next day, I went looking for that coat of arms in old archives, libraries, old newspapers, obscure internet forums. I found a strange connection with a group that had already operated in the Plovdiv region in the 1990s, an underground network of illegal adoptions, disguised as a charity. They had been investigated years ago, but the case disappeared from the news without any explanation. The symbol? It was theirs, or something that came later. I contacted a journalist who had been investigating this group at the time. Her name was Iveta. When we met in a nondescript cafe in the city center, she seemed frightened by the mere mention of the cooperative's name. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said. "These people disappeared with more than 10 children before anyone could stop them, and the files were sealed." I showed her the picture of the car, the symbol, and the hair ribbon. She was silent for a moment. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I can help you, but you have to understand one thing. If this network still exists, they won't stop because you're looking. Quite the opposite. They'll start looking for you too." And in that moment, I realized that my search for my daughter was not just a dangerous path. It was a lonely war against something much bigger than myself. But it didn't matter. I would find her, or I would die trying. Iveta handed me an old folder with yellowed pages and black and white photos. Some of the images looked like they had been taken in a hurry with news cameras from the 1990s. Children in cramped hallways, adults with blurred faces and the same symbol, the triangle with the line, drawn on boxes, doors, and papers stuck to the walls. One detail caught my attention. In one of the photos, a girl was wearing a coat that looked exactly like my daughter's. It wasn't her, of course. The image was too old, but the resemblance hit me like a knife. "What exactly was this group?" I asked. Iveta hesitated. "They presented themselves as a foundation that supported orphaned children. But what they really did was take minors from vulnerable families and pass them on, or sell them, to foreign couples, especially during the political chaos of the late 1980s and early 1990s. She turned the page. But over time, it went beyond that. They started taking children from ordinary families, as if testing the limits. The cases never moved forward because they involved big names, politicians, businessmen, police officers. Her words left me speechless. I couldn't believe that something like this could still happen today, in the middle of Plovdiv. But everything in my heart told me that this was it, that my daughter had been taken by something much deeper than a simple opportunistic criminal. And now, suddenly, I was in on it. Iveta told me that there was still one survivor, one of the boys who had escaped from one of the homes where these children were kept. His name was Simeon. Today he lived in a remote village in the mountains, hiding out of his own free will. "He has never spoken publicly," she explained, "but maybe he will speak to you, because you are a father, and he has never gotten over what he saw." I left that afternoon. 4 hours of driving in complete silence, with my daughter's red coat folded on the passenger seat. I arrived at a wooden cabin, isolated among pine trees and moss-covered rocks. When I knocked on the door, a middle-aged man with a thick beard and deep-set eyes stared at me as if he already knew who I was. "You came for the girl," he said, before I could even open my mouth. I nodded. He ushered me in. The place was dark but clean. There were old photographs on the walls of children. None of them were smiling. Simeon sat down across from me, a steaming cup of tea in his hands. He began to tell me. They didn't hit. They didn't yell, at least not at first. It was the silence that was scary, the way everything was done without emotion. The food came on metal trays. The rooms were cold. The adults wore masks, not carnival masks, neutral masks, expressionless. Every day at 8 o'clock at night, someone would come and take one of us. And that someone never came back with the child. Never. Simeon paused for a moment, his eyes filled with tears. I escaped because I hid in a false compartment behind the closet, created by another child before me. He told me, "Stay here and don't come out no matter what you hear." And I did, for 2 days. No water, no food, until I found a way out through an old window and ran to the road. I was silent for a few minutes. This was more than I could bear. But I had to know. "Do you recognize this symbol?" I asked, showing him the printed image of the triangle with the vertical line. He flinched. They used this to mark the boxes that toys came in. It was their seal. But it was also a warning. Where this symbol was, no one was to go. He handed me a hand-drawn drawing, a rough map of the location of one of the old houses he'd stayed in. He said it was near the border, but had been burned down after reports of theft began to surface. Even though it was moved somewhere else, they have a pattern. They always come back to the same spots. It's just their way. I returned to Plovdiv with this map in my hands and the feeling that something terrible was approaching. I began to cross-reference the information, the symbol, the car, the cooperative building, the names of former leaders linked to the fake foundation. I found a name that appeared in all the documents, Velislav Todorov. Velislav had been the director of a network of shelters in the 1990s. Then he disappeared. No current records, no recent photos. But his name was still linked to shell companies, suspicious donations, and even minor political campaigns. I went to the address of one of these companies. It was a modest building with a beige facade in the commercial center of Plovdiv. I pretended to be a document delivery man. I went up to the 3rd floor, where the name VTR Invest was still on the door, but no one answered. When I went down, I saw a man watching me from across the street. He had no expression. He didn't move. He just watched me. And as soon as I realized he was staring at me, he simply turned his back and got into a black car, the same model as in the video. I ran back home. It was already night, and when I walked in, something was different. The door was unlocked, the kitchen light was on, and on the table was a white envelope with no return address. Inside it was a single photo, my daughter, but not the school portrait. This was a new one. She was standing in an unfamiliar setting, staring at the camera with wide eyes, and behind her on the wall was the symbol. I broke down right there, because now I knew for sure she was still alive, and someone wanted me to know that. But they also wanted to send me a message. They were watching me. That night didn't end. It just turned into a silent vigil where every creak in the house sent chills down my spine. I couldn't sleep or close my eyes. I spent hours looking at that photo, zooming in, examining every corner, trying to extract any information about the room where my daughter was. The walls in the background looked like concrete with thin cracks. There was an unlit, old-fashioned lamp, and in the bottom corner of the image, almost out of frame, the edge of a metal bed. It was a room, but not an ordinary room. It felt cold, clinical, and the look on her face, it wasn't just fear. It was a mix of confusion and anticipation, as if she knew someone, maybe me, was trying to get to her. It tore me apart. On the back of the photo, a single handwritten word, 60. There was no context. 60 what? 60 days, 60 hours. It was a number, a warning, a limit. The next day, I went back to the police station with the image. I asked them to open a new line of investigation. I showed them all the connections, all the details. But the answer was always the same. Without concrete evidence, we can't invade private property. Then I understood once and for all that justice would not come through formal means. That if I wanted to find my daughter, I would have to cross all lines, including those of legality. I spoke to Evader again. I showed her the photo. She paled when she saw the symbol on the wall. This room looks like one of the basements they used in the past decade. The kind of structure that has disappeared from official records. But there is one place, a decommissioned psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Asanovgrad. It was never demolished. They say there are still people running it. People paid to look the other way. A few journalists tried to get in. None of them got permission. She gave me the address. That night I drove there, carrying only a flashlight, the photo, and a tape recorder in my pocket. The hospital was a sleeping giant. Broken windows, glass opaque with dirt, the main gate welded shut with iron plates. But on the side, a hole in the fence allowed entry to anyone brave enough. I went in. The silence inside was absolute, as if all the air had been sucked out of the building. The main hallway still bore old signs: triage, children's ward, room 4. I followed the map Simeon had drawn from memory, and when I reached the former isolation ward, something made me stop. There was a modern security camera, still working, mounted in a corner of the wall, facing directly at the iron door. This was no abandoned place. Someone was still there. I went down a side staircase and reached a lower floor, where the natural light no longer touched. There, each step was an auditory torture. The creaking of the stairs, the splash of moisture dripping from the ceiling, the panting breath of my own body trying to control the panic. And then I saw it. A wooden door with a digital lock. Next to it, the symbol engraved in metal. 60. That was the room number. It was engraved on the plaque above the door. Room 60. I tried to open it. It was locked. But as I got closer, I heard something that made me freeze. A muffled, childish voice coming from inside. "Father?" My heart nearly burst. I screamed her name. I pounded on the door. I tried to force the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She screamed back. Once. Then silence. I knocked harder. I called out. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Quick, heavy. They knew I was there. I ran. I hid in one of the old closets in the basement, trying to control my breathing. I saw black boots coming down the steps, flashlights cutting through the darkness. 2 men. They were talking to each other in low tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of them walked over to room 60, typed something on the panel, and went in. The door closed behind him. The other stood guard. I stayed there for almost 20 minutes until they came back up. I waited another hour before leaving. I recorded everything. I took pictures. I got back in the car and drove for 3 hours without stopping until I got to Iveta's house. I showed her the pictures. She was shocked. "You found it. They still use the hospital. She's there." But we couldn't just barge in. We needed someone who could get in without attracting attention, someone with access. That's when Iveta remembered an old source, Peter, a maintenance technician who worked in public works before disappearing from the map. According to her, Peter owed favors, and he knew how to open any door. It took us 2 days to find him. He lived in a mobile home in the middle of a vacant lot, surrounded by metalwork and tangled cables. When I showed him the photo of my daughter, he didn't hesitate. "I know this place," he said, "and I know exactly how to get in without setting off the sensors." We scheduled the invasion for the following Saturday. Petar would bring the equipment. I would bring the despair. Iveta, the evidence. The plan was simple. Enter through the technical access, go through the basement and reach room 60. If we found my daughter, we would get her out of there. If we encountered any obstacles, there was no plan B. The day before, I received another anonymous call. The same female voice. But this time, she didn't sound nervous. Just cold. You shouldn't have gone that far. Now she's going to pay for it. The silence that followed the call was more deafening than any scream. I stood still, with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to that emptiness that only happens when fear paralyzes even the air. Now, she's going to pay for this. That phrase repeated itself like an acidic echo inside me. It was a warning, or maybe a sentence, but it didn't matter. There was no turning back. The next morning, Petar arrived promptly at 4. Iveta was with him. They carried backpacks with tools, flashlights, a hand-drawn map, and an old cell phone, ready to record everything on video in case anything happened to us. The entrance was through a disused sewage pipe a few meters down the side of the hospital. It was covered with boards and tall grass, but Petar knew exactly how to open it. Within minutes, we were crawling through that dark, damp tunnel, smelling rust, stagnant water, and something else, ancient. We emerged on the other side and into the basement of the hospital, directly below the wing where room 60 was located. Petar located the power panel. He cut a specific wire, temporarily disabling the internal motion alarm system. 5 minutes, no more than that, he whispered. We climbed the iron steps. My heart was beating like a drum inside my chest. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself was trying to stop me from going. We reached the corridor of the isolation ward, and there it was, the steel door. Room 60, the symbol. Petar used a makeshift key, a small click, a beep. The red light on the dashboard went out. The door gave way, and when it opened, time stood still. The room was small, with raw concrete walls and no windows. There was an iron bed in the corner, a dim light bulb on the ceiling, a chair with handcuffs and a fixed camera in the upper corner. And in the middle of that aseptic and cruel scene, there was her, my daughter. She sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, shaking. Her eyes were wide, her hair was disheveled. But she was alive. When she saw me, it took her a second to understand. Then she jumped up and ran to me. Her embrace broke me. I cried right there on my knees, feeling her body pressed against mine as if we were trying to merge back into one. But there was no time. Petar rushed us. Iveta stayed outside, covering us. We left the room, running down the stairs. But something went wrong. Someone was there. An alarm, even with the wires cut, began to sound. Voices echoed through the hallways. Doors opened. Emergency lights flashed red. Petar pushed us back into the pipe. "Go, now!" He stayed behind, closing the iron grate behind us. We ran. We crawled. I dragged myself with my daughter in my arms through that filthy tunnel, the sound of footsteps growing more distant. When we came out on the other side, Iveta already had the car running. We got in. We sped off. And we didn't stop until we reached a cabin on the outskirts of Smolyan, which she had previously arranged. My daughter slept for 30 hours straight. She woke up crying, screaming. She asked for me and then walked away, as if she doubted that it was real. She said she never saw the kidnappers' faces, that they wore masks, that they spoke softly, that they were careful with everything except the weather. He said that one night a woman came into the room and said, "Your father already knows where you are. He's going to ruin everything." The same voice, the same threat. I wanted to call the police, show them all the evidence. But Iveta was clear. If you expose this now, they will make everything disappear, and they can still sue you for trespassing, defamation, obstruction of investigation. They have the power. You don't. So we decided to do something different. Iveta published an article. A long complaint full of documents, photos, videos. A true story. The kidnapping of my daughter, room 60, the symbol. She published it all on an international website with backup copies sent to independent newspapers. The story exploded in less than 24 hours. The pressure was so great that the Ministry of Justice was forced to speak out. Old complaints began to surface. People finally felt the courage to speak out. The hospital was surrounded. Forensic examinations began. But they found nothing. Not the men, not Petar, not any of the children. They only found the symbols, and room 60 was empty. My daughter and I are now living under protection. A new name, a new address. But every day she draws. Houses, doors, masks, symbols. She still carries the traumas. She is still afraid of the dark. And I still get letters, small anonymous ones, one a month, all with the same message. We're still here. In the first letter, there was only this sentence, nothing more. An envelope with no return address, delivered directly to the mailbox of the new house, in a city where no one knew our past. The paper was white, the handwriting clean, almost formal. But the feeling it caused me was brutal. It was as if someone had entered not only our address but my mind, as if to say, "You may have taken your daughter, but you will never leave our reach." I showed it to Iveta. She met me at the hidden cafe we used as a point of contact. She was more tense than ever. They're tracking your movements. That means that even without direct proof, you've hurt them. And when a system feels threatened, it doesn't act hastily. It acts with precision. She explained to me that after the article became popular, several victims began to seek her out. Women who had their children forcibly removed from them in the 1990s. Men who worked in maintenance at the old shelters and said they had seen strange movements of children during the early hours of the morning. One woman swore she saw her daughter being taken from a black car to a night school on the outskirts of Plovdiv in 2020, 3 months before she disappeared. And so we began to understand that it had never stopped. It had just changed its face. The network adapted. It changed its name, its headquarters, its structure. But the essence was the same. Children were selected, marked, taken. I investigated again, this time with much more caution. I avoided taking the same paths. I changed my cell phone. I changed the license plates on my car. But even so, from time to time, I received new messages. A drawing of my daughter's hair ribbon. A fragment of the image of room 60, enlarged to a blur. And in one of them, the cruelest of all, a copy of the first photo she gave me on the day of the forest project. They had access to my life before it all happened. It was then that Iveta brought up a new name. A man she had been tracking for months. He wasn't in the old files, nor in the formal charges, but he appeared as a silent financier of several foundations in the name of third parties. Nikolai Tenev, businessman, owner of private security companies, former member of a paramilitary force that was disbanded in the 1990s. Iveta managed to find out that he held monthly meetings at a private club in an upscale area of Sofia. It wasn't the kind of place you could sneak in with a hidden camera, but it was the kind of place where businessmen, judges, and politicians met, and where smiles served to hide silence contracts. We planned to sneak Iveta in under a false identity. She had done this before. She had obtained a pass as a foreign affairs journalist and had been invited to a charity cocktail party in the same building as the club. I didn't want to let her go alone, but she knew what she was doing. Outside, I waited for almost 3 hours until I received the message. I recorded everything. But we need to leave now. I found Iveta 2 blocks away. She was shaking. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "He talked about you," she said. "He said your name. He said you were bold. That you took back an important piece. But in the end, structure always wins." Tenev's voice was calm, almost bored. but the coldness in each word was like ice breaking through skin. He said that some children don't belong in this cycle, that they are observed from an early age for their exceptional emotional responses, that their job is to provide a destiny superior to the mediocrity that most would have. And then he said my daughter's name, calmly, as if she were just another number on a spreadsheet. I wanted to blow it up. I wanted the world to see what this man was. But Iveta was clear. We don't have enough yet. They have cover. But if we can prove his connection to the hospital and to the former leaders of the foundation, we can take down a key piece. And when one piece falls, the others fall apart. Over the next few days, we began to piece together this puzzle. Every contract, every bank transfer, every name that appeared on both ends of the fake foundation and of Nikolai's companies. And then we discovered something even more disturbing. Among the contracts signed in 2017, there was a multi-million-dollar loan for the renovation of a rehabilitation center for children and adolescents in northern Bulgaria. The location? A disused convent in the hills of Veliko Tarnovo. There, according to the project, was a shelter for emotionally unstable children, a term that appeared frequently in the files of the old illegal adoption network. No children had been officially registered there, but reports indicated that more than 30 patients had entered between 2018 and 2022. No records of them leaving. The suspicion was now clear. The network was not only still active, but was expanding with an even more complex structure. Religious facade, disguised legality, connections with the state. My daughter was free, but how many were still not? Iveta knew that we could not expose everything alone. The convent in Veliko Tarnovo was, according to official records, just a social welfare institution supported by private donations. A perfect facade. But what we now knew was that something much bigger was hidden beneath. And most disturbing of all, some of what we had experienced, what my daughter had gone through, was still happening to other children every day under the cover of silence. We obtained an old blueprint of the convent from an anonymous source. It was a 3-story structure with 2 underground levels. According to the blueprint, the basements had been used to store war materials during the communist regime. But the new documentation completely concealed these floors. They were invisible in the recent records. That was where they were hiding the children. We knew we couldn't get in on our own. We needed someone with access, with authority. A name came up, suggested by a source Iveta had within the prosecutor's office, Boris Alexandrov, a retired judge known for not bowing to political pressure. He had lost a son in murky circumstances in the 1990s. He had since retired from public life. But it seemed he had been investigating the same network we were now facing on his own. We arranged to meet. Boris lived in an isolated house in the mountains. We arrived at night. He greeted us with a look that said it all. He knew. He knew before we had even said a word. When Iveta showed him the footage from room 60, the audio recordings from Nikolai Tenev, and the documents from the convent, he simply muttered, "So they're still going on." We sat around the fireplace. Boris told us his story. His son had disappeared when he was 10. People said he had run away, that he had emotional problems, but he knew better. The boy was calm, balanced. He would never run away. Years later, Boris found a recording of the same female voice that had called me. It said, "Your son has been chosen. You will understand one day." He had spent the last 20 years trying to understand what that meant. And now, seeing the evidence we had brought, it all made sense. I help you, but not with words, with action. Boris still had access to members of the prosecutor's office. Most importantly, he had an old, unexpired search warrant to investigate properties linked to the former foundation. The convent, although renamed, was still under the same legal ownership. It was the legal loophole we needed. The next morning, we set out with a small, trusted team. 2 retired investigators, a forensic expert, and a surveillance technician with access to drones. We would approach the area cautiously. If we found any evidence of minors at risk, we would immediately notify international law enforcement and the independent media that had already reported on my daughter's case. When we arrived at the convent, the scene was too silent. Closed gates, no sound, no movement. But the cameras were there, hidden, active. We filed the warrant. An elderly nun greeted us with a false expression of calm. She said there were no more children there, that the institution was being shut down. But Boris had seen this kind of performance before. While she distracted us with tea and smiles, the technician installed the listening devices and the drones searched the upper floors. That's when the signal came. One of the drones detected human heat underground, at least 5 sources. We went downstairs. The first door was locked, but Boris, with a furious look, ordered it to be broken down. And there, in the narrow, stuffy corridor, faces began to appear. Children, of different ages, sitting on small mattresses, deep-set eyes, empty stares, as if they no longer knew what daylight meant. One girl held a teddy bear with the symbol scratched into its chest. Another repeated phrases under her breath, as if trapped in an endless cycle. A boy drew triangles on the floor with his fingers. When one of the children saw me, he ran over and grabbed my arm. He simply said, "Are you the father of the girl in the red coat?" We froze. She continued. She cried every day, until the woman with the sweet voice came and said she was going to disappear. But she didn't disappear. She ran away. The team called the prosecutor's office. The press arrived within 2 hours. When the police finally took control of the place, they found more than 20 children. Some with false identification, others without names. One of them was wearing the same hospital bracelet that my daughter had worn as a child, a perfect forgery, as if they had created a new origin story for each of them. And yet, nothing of the highest rank was found there. No adults, no record of the real perpetrators. Everything had been cleaned up hours before. But it didn't matter. This was the proof. This was the end of the silence. Nikolai Tenev disappeared from the country 2 days later. The foundation's website was deleted. The shell companies were liquidated, but now there were names, evidence, survivors, and most of all, the truth was out. My daughter, upon seeing the image of those children being rescued on television, remained silent for several minutes. Then she hugged me tightly and said, "They're back. Now can I go back too?" I didn't know how to answer, because the truth is that no one comes back from the same place after that. Not them, not me, not the world. The media coverage was devastating. The images of the children being pulled from the convent's basement went viral within minutes, shocking an entire country that preferred to believe that such things only happened in faraway places, in other times. But no, it was here. It was still here. And it had happened to my daughter. The press started looking for me. They wanted interviews. They wanted the face behind the accusations. I refused them all. I said that my voice was not important, that the ones who needed to be heard were the children, the survivors. Iveta, on the other hand, spoke up, with courage, with data, with evidence. She became the face of the truth, and she paid dearly for it. 3 weeks after the operation in the convent, she was attacked. A car pushed her off the road as she was returning from an interview in Sofia. She fractured her leg. She broke 2 ribs, but she survived. And even in the hospital, she gave a final interview saying, "They are still here. If we don't look, they will go back into hiding." Meanwhile, Nikolai Tenev's trail led to the Serbian border. Then he disappeared. But new names began to appear. Businessmen, retired judges, former ministers, all with some connection to the old foundation. The network was not a centralized organization. It was an ecosystem, and now we knew that. My daughter started therapy with a trauma specialist. The first few weeks were difficult. She refused to talk. She avoided the light. But over time, she began to draw. First shadows, then windows, then faces, and in one of those drawings, a girl with braided hair appeared, alone in a dark hallway. Beside her, a scribbled symbol and a name. Sophie. I asked who it was. She replied in a whisper. She protected me. I went back to the archives. No child named Sophie was registered among those rescued. I showed the drawing to the authorities. No one could say who she was. But one of the volunteers who was involved in the operation remembered a girl who, shortly before the rescue, led the children to the back stairs and then disappeared. They said she was not found among the others, that perhaps she had run away before. My daughter insisted, "She's still there." I asked for access to the footage of the operation. In one of the very short recordings, a body camera captured a child running down a hallway opposite the main exit. The image was blurry, but the silhouette matched what my daughter had drawn. Sophie existed, and maybe she was still trapped somewhere else. This thought kept me awake at night. I began searching for abandoned buildings near the convent. I found a disused orphanage, closed for over 15 years, just 4 kilometers away. Records showed that the place belonged to a philanthropic foundation with the same tax address as Nikolai's security company. I went there. The building was locked. The windows were boarded up. But a sound caught my attention. A bell. Low, almost imperceptible. I rang the door. No one answered. I went around to the back. An iron gate, partially rusted, gave way under the pressure. Inside was a maze of musty hallways and locked doors, and then on the top floor, I found a room. Small, dirty, but with organized toys, dolls lined up, a diary hidden under a mattress. The name written on the cover, Sophie. I flipped through it with trembling hands. The handwriting was that of a child, but the lucidity, it was frightening. She described the routine, the sounds, the names of the other girls. And on one of the final pages, there was a warning. If anyone finds this, it's because I'm gone. But there are still others here. They just don't know how to scream anymore. I ran downstairs. I called Boris. He called the prosecutor's office. In less than 2 hours, a new operation was set up. The building was raided. And there, in rooms disguised as storage, we found 5 more girls. One of them, when she saw me, asked, "Are you the father of the girl in the red coat?" It was like a cycle, an echo of the past. A warning that, even after everything, the roots of that system were still there, infiltrated in forgotten places, fed by fear and indifference. My daughter watched the operation on television. When she saw one of the girls come out carrying a doll just like hers, she smiled for the first time since she returned. And she said, "Now we're going back. Today, I live under a new name. So does my daughter. But every month, on the same day I received the first letter, I light a candle. For Iveta, who survived but will never sleep peacefully again. For Boris, who died of a heart attack days after his last operation. For Petar, who was never found again. And for all the children who are still waiting for someone to scream for them. If you're listening to this, and you have children, look them in the eye today. And promise that you'll protect them, even when the whole world tells you it's okay. Because sometimes darkness doesn't come from where we expect it. Sometimes she is already inside the house. Thanks for listening to our stories. Until next time.